In 1944, when an American pilot crashed deep inside enemy territory, survival didn't begin with a weapon. It began with silence. Every breath became a strategy. Every decision, a coin toss between freedom and a firing squad. These airmen weren't trained for the forests of Saxony or the cellars of Bavaria, but still they moved on foot, in disguise, sometimes barefoot, sometimes with forged papers written in the blood of fallen friends. What saved them wasn't strength. It was improvisation, memory, and grit. They used shirt buttons to count paces, soap to mimic stamps, and shoe polish to darken maps etched on silk. These weren't gadgets. They were prayers. Today, we uncover 11 real tactics American airmen used to vanish behind enemy lines, forgotten by time, buried beneath medals, but still echoing in every story that ends with "He made it home." Subscribe and hit like this because these stories didn't survive by accident. Someone kept them alive. Now it's our turn. Number 1, silk maps. In jacket linings, a wool jacket looked ordinary, but stitched inside its lining, folded so thin, it felt like nothing was a printed silk map. It didn't crinkle, it didn't tear, and it couldn't be heard. To an airman shot down over occupied Europe, that invisible map was more valuable than a sidearm. Unlike paper, silk could survive sweat, rain, even a dip in a freezing river. It could be crumpled, hidden in a boot sole, or sewn inside a collar seam. And that's exactly what intelligence units did. They embedded escape routes into the clothes worn by pilots, routes marked not with names, but rivers, forests, and rail lines, because language could betray, but landmarks remained silent. Some were printed in disappearing ink, only readable under heat or sunlight. Others glowed faintly at night, just enough to orient yourself by moonlight without being seen. Most maps included lines leading toward neutral territories like Switzerland or Spain, but more than directions, they gave downed airmen something rare in hostile land: a silent compass and hope. These weren't issued widely. Only select bomber crews and reconnaissance pilots received them, often just hours before a mission. The silk wasn't labeled, no insignia, just colors, folds, and silence. And yet, that simple square of cloth gave a man one more chance at the impossible. It was knowledge, smuggled into the war, stitched between cotton and fear. It's the kind of trick that reminds us survival isn't loud. It's hidden in plain cloth, waiting for the right hands. Number 2, shadow mimicry tactics. In enemy territory, movement wasn't just dangerous, it was a death sentence. But the shadows told a different story. U.S. airmen, trapped behind German lines, learned to move with them, not through them. They called it shadow mimicry, a tactic born from watching how light betrayed even the quietest step. Instead of dashing from cover to cover, these airmen studied how local patrols moved at night. They'd trail just behind, matching their speed and pausing when they paused. Not to follow, but to merge. Their steps fell inside enemy footsteps. Their silhouette blurred into the ones already expected to be there. Abandoned farmsteads and wooded paths became safer routes, not because they were hidden, but because they were already watched. Soldiers expected their own. The trick was to blend, not vanish. This wasn't about camouflage, it was rhythm, posture, timing. Some carried broken glass to read moonlight angles. Others used soot to mute the sheen of gear. But mostly, it was body language. Crouch too early, you look guilty. Move too fast, you look wrong. But if you carry a bucket or walk like you've done it every day, even armed guards might nod and look away. It worked best near occupied barns, fuel depots, or civilian zones where movement wasn't suspicious unless it drew attention. A man pretending to be invisible was seen, but one who mimicked a familiar shadow. He passed like smoke through locked doors. This tactic wasn't taught in training. It was learned in forests, refined in back alleys, and perfected under the weight of fear. It wasn't invisibility. It was invisibility's quiet cousin, familiarity in motion. And for many stranded behind enemy lines, it meant the difference between being hunted or simply overlooked. Number 3, boot buckle sound distortion. At night, sound drew attention before eyes ever did. In the ruined lanes around downed airfields, a single misplaced clink could turn hope into pursuit. Survivors learned to weaponize sound not by making noise, but by moving it. A boot buckle, small and metallic, became the perfect misdirection. Instead of silence, men created distant clatters and false directions. One loop of leather, one deliberate scrape against stone, and patrols swung their heads toward that phantom movement. The real escape route stayed calm, unseen. This trick relied on timing more than tools. Soldiers practiced releasing small noises at intervals, letting wind carry them into empty courtyards or closed gates. Often the sound came from a cast-off belt or a spare strap item that drew attention by accident and therefore passed scrutiny. Patrols investigated the obvious sound while the living slipped past in the shadowed alleys. Witness accounts from debriefs describe men who crawled under fences while others kicked can lids down a street to the sound of a coin. The point was never to overpower the enemy with noise. It was to tell a convincing story, to paint movement where none existed. When a unit learned that commands raced toward the sound, they learned to build soundscapes that guided boots away from their path. There was art to it. Too many noises and the ruse failed. Too few and no one moved. The best diversions sounded accidental. Trash tumbling, a dropped strap, a boot catching a nail, nothing that screamed ambush. When the deception worked, the silence that followed felt holy. Men crossed fields with breath held, listening for footsteps that now belonged somewhere else. Later, in mess tents and safe houses, those same men spoke of the little metallic echo that had saved them, laughing softly at how a careless clink could change fate. Small sounds, dressed as accidents, brought men home. That clatter became legend among their squadrons. A humble salvation remembered in quiet tones. It was survival spoken softly, and the echo kept them alive, always near. Number 4, grassblade Morse coding communication wasn't always shouted, written, or wired. Sometimes it grew silently in the grass. When American airmen were grounded behind enemy lines, they couldn't rely on radios. Even whispers could be fatal, so they turned to what couldn't be traced to nature itself. And in one of the war's strangest innovations, blades of grass became messengers. Each blade, plucked and pressed in a certain direction, pointed to a letter in Morse. 2 forward, 1 back. 3 right, none left. Entire words laid down in small patches of disturbed soil. From above, it looked like wind, but to trained eyes, it spelled escape, danger, or help. Local resistance fighters, especially children, learned to read the signs. A garden patch might say, move. A fence line might say, wait. The blades acted like ink that couldn't be erased, couldn't be tracked, and vanished once stepped on. Within hours, messages were gone, forgotten by the land, remembered only by those who passed through. Airmen used this system near drop sites, under hedgerows or beside old wells where couriers checked for signs. If grass was pressed flat in 3s, it meant a drop was coming. If it pointed outward, the zone was hot. Everything depended on pattern, memory, and silence. This wasn't battlefield technology. It was survival born in whispers and weeds. A way to speak without sound. A code with no wires, no batteries, just trust. The brilliance lay in its simplicity. No one suspected the grass. And for those who read it, each blade mattered. Every silent message passed under boots, under wind, under watchful eyes. They never heard it, but it saved lives. Number 5, railroad timetable memorization. Steel rails carved escape routes through occupied Europe, but only if you knew when to run. For American airmen hiding behind enemy lines, memorizing railway timetables became an act of war. There were no phones to call a ride, no tickets to buy, no second chances. The only way out was through trains, and knowing exactly when they came and went meant the difference between vanishing and vanishing forever. French resistance couriers, many just teenagers, memorized regional schedules by heart, not written, not spoken, just known. They passed this knowledge quietly, sometimes over soup, sometimes under shelling. An eastbound freight at 3:17, a slow passenger at 6:42, a coal train that always stopped near the river bend. No papers changed hands, just glances, nods, and time. Airmen had to recall these patterns under pressure, disguised as farmers, riding in ox carts, waiting hours in ditches for the rumble of the right train. Some hid near bridges, counting how long it took between whistles. Others listened to village bells and matched them to distant smoke. They didn't need watches. They needed rhythm. Once aboard, the danger wasn't over. German patrols often checked identification mid-journey, so travelers matched their boarding with shift changes. If a train left just after the night guards rotated, it was safer. Not safe, just safer. This was more than memory. It was choreography, rehearsed with tension and silence, and it required courage no schedule could predict. Because each train wasn't just transportation. It was timing, trust, and one shot at freedom. Number 6, graveyards for hiding. The safest place to disappear was among the dead. In Nazi-occupied Europe, graveyards offered something no roadblock or safe house could silence. No patrol lingered long among the tombstones. No soldier wanted to question a mourner. And in that gap between fear and respect, resistance fighters found refuge. American airmen, shot down over France or Belgium, were often hidden by locals who knew every crooked tree and forgotten crypt. Coffins weren't just for burials, they became lockers for maps, clothes, or forged papers. Some families even reburied loved ones with hollowed sections beneath, ready to shelter someone running from the Reich. Tomb keepers, often old men dismissed as harmless, acted as sentries. If boots echoed off gravel, they tapped a cane or moved a lantern. And the signal was clear: vanish beneath the lilies, between the stones, under the weeping angel's wings. Some graves were never used for the dead, just built as stone decoys with hidden compartments for food, notes, or escape routes. A chipped corner might mean wait. A broken vase might mean go. At night, safe houses led directly into cemeteries. Paths only locals dared tread. No barking dogs, no sudden knocks, just candlelight and soil. To survive, airmen didn't just rely on guns or grit. They relied on people who understood that sometimes peace could only be found where sorrow lived, because in the shadow of death, life found a way to hide. Number 7. Swallowed microscrolls in gum. In a world where capture meant silence or worse, words had to vanish. Allied airmen dropped behind enemy lines carried no briefcases, no obvious clues. Their orders, escape routes, and contacts, everything vital had to travel hidden, invisible, and sometimes edible. Inside thin beads of hardened gum resin, barely the size of a fingernail, lay microscrolls. Strips of rice paper, no wider than a matchstick, rolled so tightly they could fit inside a single capsule. The resin masked them with the texture of chewed sap. And if trouble neared, one simple act erased the evidence. They didn't just carry instructions, they carried proof. Safe house addresses, recognition phrases, even coded responses for check-ins with resistance cells. Everything was fragile, small, and written in ink designed to withstand digestion just long enough. Training included how to swallow them in under a second. No hesitation, no trace. One gulp, and the message disappeared into the body, safe from inspections, dogs, or sudden betrayal. In some cases, captured soldiers were searched head to toe, pockets, seams, shoelaces, undone. But no one checked beneath the tongue for a smooth bead that felt like a stray candy or toothache remedy. That tiny sphere held days of planning, and sometimes the difference between escape or execution. Not every scroll was recovered. Some dissolved in fear. Some were forgotten. But the ones that reached the right hands, they helped dozens find their way home. Because in war, the smallest message protected by instinct, hidden in silence, could still carry the weight of freedom. Number 8. Insect-triggered alert systems. A twig snapping meant nothing. But the sudden silence of crickets? That meant someone was watching. In the dense forests of occupied Europe, noise gave away position. But in absolute quiet, it was the insects who told the truth. Resistance scouts and allied escapees learned fast. You don't just listen to footsteps. You listen to what stops when danger moves close. Crickets, frogs, and beetles would hum and chirp in a steady rhythm. When that rhythm broke, it wasn't random. It was a movement. Soldiers crawling, boots adjusting. Even a held breath changed the air enough to hush the night chorus. To harness this, some fighters set tiny traps using spider webs and shallow leaves. If a web broke, or if resting beetles scattered before dawn, it meant the perimeter had been breached. Others tied thread to dry twigs and balanced them between stones. The insects knew the area. If they vanished, the line had shifted. This wasn't science. It was instinct, observation, a kind of primitive radar built from stillness and repetition. In Italy's Apennines, partisans would place small piles of crushed fruit to attract ants, then watch their formations from a distance. When the trails broke or diverted unexpectedly, it warned them before any guard dog ever could. Insects became sentries, not because they were trained, but because humans learned to listen to a language that needed no translation, only attention. Because in places where radios failed and voices betrayed, even a moth's flutter could mean survival. Number 9. Snow patterns as camouflage signals. Snow didn't just cover footsteps, it told stories to those who knew where to look. Behind enemy lines during harsh European winters, Allied airmen and resistance scouts learned to read snow like a map. But more than that, they turned it into a tool, one that whispered warnings, marked safe paths, or signaled an all clear, without leaving a trace. It started with subtle shifts, a single drag of a stick, a pattern of boot prints that didn't match the rest, a curved arc in the snowbank, none of it random. To untrained eyes, it was nature. To allies, it was a coded message. Some marks meant safe to pass, others meant enemy spotted. In isolated fields, a snow angel wasn't a game, it was a distress call. Slashed footprints meant double back, and tiny divots from thrown stones created Morse patterns visible only from certain angles, and every imprint was temporarily erased with a sweep of wind. Partisans learned to drag evergreen branches behind them, breaking trail in a deliberate rhythm. The shape of the brush marks told whether to follow or stay away. No ink, no fire, no sound, just frozen silence that guided men through death's backyard. Airmen used glint signals, shiny objects half buried in snow, aligned with the sun, to mark direction for recon planes or fellow escapees. Sometimes, even snowmen were placed oddly facing left or right as silent signposts that blended into the landscape. This wasn't just clever. It was survival sculpted into the cold. Because when your breath fogs the air and even speaking is a risk, the snow becomes your voice. For more hidden brilliance buried in winter's white silence, subscribe now. Number 10. Frostmelt footprints fake out. In the frost-bitten landscapes of Nazi-occupied Europe, airmen and resistance fighters faced a chilling problem: footprints. Each step in fresh snow was a confession, a path, a trail for enemy boots to follow straight to hiding spots, tunnels, or supply caches. So they invented ways to lie with every footfall. Some soaked their boots in cold water before walking, leaving no sunken print, just a shimmered frost crust that vanished under daylight. Others heated boot soles over coals, leaving temporary melts that faded fast as the snow refroze behind them. It looked like a ghost had passed, not a man. One trick involved walking backward in snowshoes. It made it look like someone left a camp instead of entering. Another method? Layering old prints. A team would drag fur-wrapped branches behind them, blurring the tracks into nothing more than a ripple across the terrain. Some even wore hoof-shaped covers, wooden or leather cutouts strapped to boots to mimic livestock movement. Seen from above, it was just a wandering goat or a stray mule, not someone smuggling intel through no man's land. And when real escape was urgent, frost melt was used in reverse. Fighters would dig shallow footprints, then pour warm water in them, mimicking the fresh melt left by a passing patrol. It misled trackers into chasing a phantom group, buying precious hours for the real team slipping away in the opposite direction. It wasn't high-tech. It was high stakes. Because when survival froze over, the best deception melted before morning. Want more forgotten genius that fooled entire armies? Subscribe now and walk the trail most never saw. Number 11, electric lines to neutral borders. Not every escape needed a tunnel or a stolen truck. Some just followed the wires. Across Nazi-occupied Europe, tall electric lines sliced through forests, farmlands, and villages stretching from deep inside enemy territory to the edges of freedom. To most, they were just power lines. But to those trying to escape, they were secret roadmaps. Airmen shot down behind enemy lines quickly learned: follow the cables, and they'll lead somewhere important, often straight to train depots, abandoned checkpoints, or border crossings hidden by snow and shadow. And in some cases, to neutral countries like Switzerland or Spain. But it wasn't just about direction. These lines avoided towns, patrol routes, and major roads. They crossed ravines and fields that rarely saw foot traffic. Perfect for a silent passage, resistance fighters even created nicknames for certain routes: the Wire Road, Skyline Path, or Ghost Line. Locals would whisper, "If you see 3 poles and a crooked fourth, you're heading west." But there were risks. Some lines carried high voltage. Others passed near German outposts. So escapees moved mostly at night, tracing the shadows of the poles, counting steps between towers. When fog rolled in, they'd tie string from boot to pole, never losing contact. One legendary escape involved 2 downed pilots and a French farmer's son. With nothing but a stolen compass and the hum of the current overhead, they walked for 3 days. The wire never curved, never lied. On the 4th morning, they stepped across a small creek and into Switzerland. No maps, no radio, just a buzzing lifeline in the sky, followed in silence. Because sometimes freedom hums quietly above your head. You just have to know how to listen. For more daring routes and genius escapes, subscribe now. History like this doesn't come with warning signs. These weren't just tricks. They were lifelines born not in classrooms but in shadows, whispers, and desperation. Every coded footprint in the snow, every insect alert in the dark, every stolen map sewn into a jacket, they weren't accidents. They were survival strategies crafted by minds that refused to break even when surrounded, even when hunted. These men didn't just escape. They outsmarted, not with weapons, but with wit, not with strength, but with silence. And if you felt even a flicker of awe hearing these stories, imagine how many more have been buried in forgotten logbooks, burnt uniforms, and unmarked borders. So if you're the kind of person who wants to uncover the untold, the invisible, and the downright genius, then this channel is your front row seat. Hit that subscribe button, because these stories aren't just history. They're blueprints of resilience, waiting to be read again. And trust me, what's coming next, you won't want to miss it.